Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Kyle Detwiler, CEO of Clever Leaves. Hello, Kyle. How are you?
Hey, doing great, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Hey, I know you told me before we started recording, but I wanted to congratulate you again on the newborn baby boy of 8 months now. That's exciting.
Yeah, thanks. He just started crawling a couple days ago, and that's definitely, thank goodness we had 8 months to get used to him. But because now he's crawling, you got to be watching him all the time. So he moves pretty quickly.
Once they're mobile, man, yeah, it's like all bets are off. You got to keep a watch on them. I recently got married this year. Luckily, during all this craziness, but that's the next step. I mean, we might wait a year, but kids are in our foreseeable future. So I bet it's
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I bet it's been pretty life-changing, to say the least.
Yeah, it's great. You see part of your wife and part of yourself in your children, and you always want the best for them. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, hey, for those listening, as I mentioned, I have Kyle Detwiler on the episode today. He is the CEO of Clever Leaves, which is a vertically integrated multi-nation operator with operations and facilities in Canada, Colombia, Germany, Portugal, and in the US. Kyle, before we jump into Clever Leaves and on the strong and huge footprint that y'all have, not only in Europe and in Latin America, let's allow the audience to get a little bit of your background. So from what I've researched and what I understand, after graduating from Harvard cum laude, you were at KKR and Blackstone for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I worked in the private equity teams at those two firms.
Very nice. And so what kind of grabbed your interest or had you kind of transition your focus to the cannabis industry?
Yeah, it was really by accident. I think if I had to describe it the best, so I left Blackstone in 2015, and I think there are some people that can be do very well professionally staying at a firm like that. And I'd always been tugging a little bit on my reins and really wanted to break out and kind of do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And so I left Blackstone in 2015 and started looking at a couple of fairly interesting industries that were, not being looked at by most investors. And, my partner and co-founder at one point looked over at me and said, hey, I think we should think about the cannabis industry, right? I think it's going to evolve very fast. There's a really, incorrect stereotype about cannabis. And in a couple of years, I think that's going to all change. And, I was a child of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. I remember having, baseball cards from my DARE, drug police officer in elementary school. And so I had never really used cannabis before, had a bad experience. Really the one time I had been introduced to it. And so wasn't really focused on it. And then I just started learning, spent a couple months, my co-founder really told me about how it affected him personally. It was the only thing that cured his insomnia when he was in his early 20s, and has allowed him to be, a more functional person. And then, the stories about friends that have undergone cancer treatment or other palliative care, became a bit more moving. And I said, well, I'm hooked. This is interesting because I've spent a lot of time in the agricultural space. That's a lot of what cannabis is. I spent a lot of time in the healthcare space, specifically with pharmaceutical products. And so, that's really, I think, the way the DNA of Clever Leaves at its core is kind of the combination of those two industries.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the DARE stickers and whatnot. I mean, those T-shirts, if you can find them, are very vintage at this point. I think that they're priced pretty high. So yeah, I mean, I remember the DARE era as well. And so, when you kind of were looking at different industries from an investment standpoint, and you saw that cannabis was one, you said you did your research, you talked to industry peers and friends that had experience with the plant and it helped them medicinally. Did you ever kind of try it again to see for yourself, or did you kind of just, was it more R&D on your end, through just reading and talking with people?
Yeah, I did, and it was I actually, with my with my now wife, we took a trip out to Oregon. My business partner and I had actually considered parting ways. He was so interested in the cannabis industry. He said, "I think I need to move to Oregon and be part of this." And I was thinking about staying behind in New York City, and maybe we'd get sort of a bi-coastal partnership. And so I kind of went out there to almost help not quite move him out literally, but help figuratively move him out there. And so I went out to see some of the operations that he was thinking about investing in, and try to gummy. And it was very different than what I had experienced years ago. My experience back then was I got very groggy and I ate a pizza. I said, this really isn't for me. Whereas this, my wife and I had a blissful afternoon. It was a responsible adult use or recreational type product. I didn't have any particular ailments, but I didn't have sugar, I didn't have carbs. I had a great day. I remember everything was very lucid. Compared, it was also a 4th of July weekend, so compared to the speedboats full of drunk college kids, we had a great time. And next morning woke up and went on tours of Portland. It was great.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like Oregon and some parts of California are becoming like the new Napa in terms of, checking out the farms and the grow operations in those areas and trying the product. So that's awesome that you experienced that. So, okay. So now let's fast forward a little bit. So let's talk about Northern Swan and the integration with Northern Swan in Clever Leaves in 2019. Is kind of that when this was all born?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I mean, we started looking at the cannabis industry in the 2015 timeframe. It took us really 2 years to get our arms around it, though. I mean, it was in some ways it's the biggest investment opportunity and social opportunity I've ever seen. Right? Our generation's never going to see something like this again. Right? And this is like the end of prohibition, but it was also really complicated, right? Where do you want to be? Do you want to be in Canada? Do you want to be in the US? If it's in the US, do you want to be on the West Coast where, all the brands and kind of history is? Do you want to be on the East Coast where maybe these licenses are harder to get and therefore more valuable? There was a big debate about that. And so because I had worked in the investment industry before, the most logical place was to say, well, we should be investors, right? What do we know about running a cannabis operation? We've never done it before.
Mm-hmm.
So we started an investment firm called Northern Swan, and what we quickly learned during that process was, the types of things that we wanted to do didn't exist. After studying the U.S. and the Canadian industry, we realized maybe there's something more interesting out there. What's even more fashion forward? Like, what is the market going to want in 5 or 10 years? And I took cues from the pharmaceutical industry that I worked in before. And if you're making cheap pharmaceutical API, you don't do that in the United States, right? You do it in low-cost regions like China or India or the Philippines. And also, if you're trying to produce, produce like asparagus or blueberries or sugarcane, right? You don't try to do that in the U.S. Some people still do it, and there's some reasons why you would do it. But fashion-forward agriculture is near the equator, where you can have perennial year-round growing. And so, really, those kind of ideas combined, and we found a team and a license really down in Colombia. And so that was really how that all came together.
I wanna pause you there, and we'll fast forward to when you talked about getting the license in Colombia. But I do want to back up, and when you're looking outside of Canada and the U.S. For other opportunities, and really look at being forward thinking in that approach, did the Schedule 1 also kind of, and the regulations and red tape and the complexity of the regulations between states, was that kind of another deciding factor to look past the U.S. and Canada and other markets?
100%. There was some pretty compelling reasons to look at U.S. opportunities. It's a big market. People have been using it for a while. there's no doubt that the demand is there, right? And that matters quite a bit, right? The investment thesis is you're changing a black market to a regulated market, right? Just substitution. So that's always easier than trying to build an industry, but it still was in violation of federal law. And yes, it was not one where, FBI stormtroopers are going to come, raid your house unless you were trying to transport product across state lines or something crazy like that. But it felt a little strange, to be honest. And so we said, well, again, that's what a lot of people are doing. How can we be different? What other opportunities are out there? And I listened to a pitch for a Canadian company once, and they said they were going to list on the NASDAQ. And I said, well, that's amazing. How could you do that? I mean, what you're doing is a crime in the United States. And they said, well, it's not a crime in the countries in which we operate. And so that kind of helped the light bulb go off and say, wait a minute, we can follow US federal law. We can go build a business where a lot of other companies can't or don't want to go. And, in 5 or 10 years, I think the US is going to change its mind about cannabis law. And then we can connect, our organization to American businesses. So we decided if we're going to go that path, we got to be fully clean, right? We have to only operate in countries where what we're doing is allowed, so that, we're not violating any laws of the United States while we do it, or elsewhere.
Well, and so when that light bulb moment kind of came, hit you, why Colombia? I mean, obviously in hindsight, it was a great decision because y'all are one of the largest producers in Colombia, and you employ approximately 500 people in the region, right? But why Colombia initially? What attracted you to that country?
Well, we studied the rose industry, and it was after visiting greenhouses in Southern California. One thing we noticed is a lot of the greenhouses that we were looking at, they were growing cannabis today, but you kind of ask them, well, what did you used to grow? And before that, it was tomatoes, and before that, even earlier into like the 80s, it was red roses. And I thought that was really interesting. And I said, well, why can't you still grow roses? I mean, Pasadena has the Rose Day Parade. I mean, it's part of the culture, and the Central Valley and many parts of California were huge rose producers, but it's just become too expensive. And it doesn't really make sense to use land in California to do this type of thing if you want to be, environmentally efficient, grow year round. And so we followed the roses, and it looks, as it turned out, today about 7 in 10 cut flower imports to the United States come from Colombia. And so as we were thinking about the Caribbean, places like Jamaica or any of the island countries, they get hit by hurricanes. Puerto Rico had just gone through a similar experience, and Colombia was also beneficial because it was going to be legal there, right? Not every country in Latin America or near the equator has embraced cannabis. So Colombia had the roses, it had the legislation, it had the good environment, for producing cannabis, and so that's really what led us down there in the first place.
And that brings up an interesting point in that how in this country our approach to cannabis infrastructure, right? It seems like it's being built where it's legal, just because obviously those are the places where people are flocking, and they're but when it becomes more economically or environmentally friendly, that's where it's not there yet, right? So it sounds like with Colombia, that was the perfect place to kind of build that cannabis infrastructure.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, everybody that's in the cannabis industry knows that it's a question of when, not if. People are going to shut down all these really expensive facilities that they're building in states like New York and Illinois, right? You can't grow cannabis in the snow. Right? So you have to build these really, really expensive facilities to produce it. And that only works for a moment in time, right? And eventually, in 5 or 10 years, people are going to say, it is ridiculous. It's terrible for the environment. It's super expensive. It's not natural to grow cannabis in facilities in Canada at all, but for a couple different, places. We shouldn't be doing this. And, the consumer will eventually care about that. Today, it just wants to get the product, but in the future, people are going to care about sustainability. They're going to care about the environment. I remember once I read an article that talked about the growth in the Colorado power grid over, I think it was like a 5 or 10 year horizon. And they estimated that over half of the growth in power consumption in Colorado was from indoor marijuana operations.
Wow.
That's just insane.
I totally believe that, because the lighting, right? The amount of energy and power that you're running within those facilities, it's massive. It's crazy.
Yeah. No, so, we don't have to have that environment in Colombia. It's natural. It's where the plant wants to grow. And so, not only does that lower our costs, but in the long run, when people start thinking about the carbon cycle to this and what the impact of growing this is for the environment, I think people are going to actually start valuing at a premium, something coming from a place like Colombia, where it's more natural.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's speak a little more to this. So let's talk about Clever Leaves' approach to cannabis infrastructure in the other countries in which it operates. So Canada, Germany, United States. We touched on Colombia. So I know that within your verticals, y'all focus on genetics, cultivation, extraction, research and development, wholesale and distribution, and brands. I got all this from your website, right? So where do each of those verticals play a part in these countries?
Well, Clever Leaves is best known, and its core business strategy is on being a supplier of either flower, cannabis, or extracted cannabinoids. In Colombia, we can only export extracted products, so we can't sell flower. So we have these pictures behind me. That's all in Colombia. So that's 1.8 million square feet of greenhouses. It's always hard to measure this, but that is definitely one of the largest, if not the largest, single greenhouse complex for growing cannabis on the planet. This is also, Latin America's only EU GMP certified extraction lab. So all we're producing is these fine extracts, which you see in this picture. But people want more than just extracts. But Colombia wouldn't allow it. So, we wanted to find a region which was federally legal and made sense to put an operation there. So we picked southern Portugal, which is a home to a lot of berry operations, and supply in Europe or Northern Africa or wherever else. And so we said, okay, Portugal would allow us to produce flower for sale, and it's a third of the cost of Canada and the U.S. on average. So it's not as great as Colombia, but because Colombia doesn't have the right regulations, even we had to kind of do something that was a little bit unnatural, and put something in Portugal, but it's still much more efficient there than it would be in Canada. And those are the only two places in the world that we produce cannabinoids. One's a flower operation, one's an extract operation, and then everything else is really potential distribution. So we don't own any buildings in Canada. We have a sales team there. We do lease a facility in Germany for importing product, but it's really also just a sales team. In the U.S., we do own a different business. We didn't want to violate any federal laws or state and local in the U.S. So how do you prepare yourself for cannabis? Well, we decided to buy a nutraceutical company. They sell cleanses and detox beverages, and so the thought would be, let's buy that today. It's a nice business. It's a good price. It comes with a nice team. It sells to a lot of the customers like GNC, Vitamin Shop, places that we want our products in the future. And someday, not today, but someday we'll start selling cannabinoid products and use that platform to do it. And a Canadian company just emulated this. They bought a beer company. Afria bought, I think it was called Sweetwater was the name of the beer company. So not a cannabis company, but they hope one day to put cannabis in that alcoholic beverage and augment its growth that way.
Yeah, and the rise and the emergence of cannabinoids in food and beverage is increasing, right? And we're going to see that more and more play out over the coming years. So a move like that totally makes sense. So let's talk more about international markets. So are there any other countries that are on Clever Leaves' radar in terms of maybe just interesting things that they're doing, or things that they're really doing well, or plans to expand maybe? I know that I've heard Mexico considering full legalization at some point. Brazil, I'm not sure where they stand on that, but there's another emerging market. So what are your thoughts on these and other countries?
Yeah, I think you named the two most interesting to us in the Western Hemisphere right now. I mean, we haven't been able to import commercial product into Canada. We haven't been able to import large-scale commercial product into the U.S. either, so we're kind of those are on hold. So if you think about Brazil and Mexico, I think Brazil is actually, and this surprises most people, but it is where Clever Leaves now has its largest contract, right, to supply cannabinoids. And the market is very, very different. You know, most Americans and Canadians even will think about, okay, you know, I assume there's going to be a dispensary, there's going to be some producers, I'll go into the store and pick some flower, or maybe I want a vape pen or something like that. That is not the case. That's one model of cannabis legalization. The other model is a truly pharmaceutical product. And Germany is like that, and Brazil is like that. And we think countries like Mexico, when they legalize, will also look like that. So here, you know, for example, are a couple of the rules. The first is production of cannabis in the country of Brazil is prohibited. So there's no domestic production of it whatsoever. The second is it's only in an extracted in oil format. So there's no flower. The third is it's a pharmaceutical product, so it has to be prescribed by physicians, typically distributed through a pharmacy system or type of regulation. And the fourth is you have to have this famous GMP certification that is recognized by the Brazilian Pharmaceutical Authority, which is called Anvisa. That's their FDA. And then the fifth, and the most important, and most people never even think about this in the American, the Canadian cannabis industry, is if you're a pharmaceutical product and you're on the shelf right next to, I don't know, Humira or Lipitor or, you know, whatever the other product is, those pharmaceutical companies will sue you to kingdom come if you aren't, you know, following pharmaceutical protocols. And so something as simple as a shelf life, right? You know, you go in and buy milk, you've got 2 weeks until it expires. Well, there's a shelf life for some pharmaceutical products, but the amount of energy and effort that has to go into proving that is very, very cumbersome. And in fact, what's even more interesting is Brazil, you have to test those pharmaceutical products in an entire different temperature and humidity environment than what you do in the US. So if you're a US pharmaceutical company, you don't go test every product and prove it has a shelf life in the tropics of the Amazon. Why would you do that? But if you want to sell that product in Brazil, you have to do what is called the Zone 4B stability data. And that in itself, so I've given you a lot of interesting things about Brazil. I've also explained why can only a few companies in the world sell into that. And so I would challenge you, find one other company that has sold $4 million of product into Brazil. And I don't think it's out there. And Clever Leaves has signed that contract. So Brazil is going to be a big opportunity for us.
That's amazing. Wow. And I mean, just the criteria that you mentioned going into just selling, right? I mean, the fact that there's no domestic cultivation, needs to be extracted, needs to be sold through the pharmaceutical system, and the shelf life thing is so on previous episodes we've talked about this, and this was something that I learned in that over time, of course, the potency levels will change, right? Depending on the shelf life, how long it's not being used. So you're saying that if they are not regularly tested past the shelf life, then pharmaceutical product and companies that are next to those products on the shelf could sue because of that, because of the lack of doing that, their lack of testing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of people that could interfere with your business if you made up your shelf life. Like if you're a pharmaceutical company and you put this is good until December of 2021, that means something, right? There is a long process that went into that. It's not just like figure in the air. I think that's when the THC level changes, or that's when the liquid congeals a bit more, becomes crystallized. It's not as simple as that, which is how a lot of American cannabis operations are here. So for Brazil, I mean, we have to have said that we took that product in the same bottle, like a brown glass bottle with a rubber stopper. We tested that for 9 months to determine exactly what's going to happen to that cannabinoid profile, or just the integrity of the bottle itself. And here are 600 pages of analysis and explanation about how we did that and why it should stand up to a pharmaceutical level of scrutiny. That's how much work has to go into make one product. If I just change that concentration of CBD from 10% to 15%, got to do it all over again.
Wow. Wow. And is that like newly implemented legislation within Brazil, or is this something that's been around for a while, these regulations?
So Brazil just began to legalize, really, I would say, in 2020. So there's three kind of phases of the regulation. The first phase in Brazil was that you could import product to an individual person with an individual permit. So it was very time consuming, and so the numbers are very small. The second phase, which we're in now, is you can authorize or register the cannabis product in sort of a short form pharmaceutical process. You don't have to do, lengthy drug trials, but you have to prove, stability or its shelf life. You have to prove what's in it. It has to contain cannabinoids, et cetera. And you get sort of a short-circuited path to registration, but it's still a registration process nonetheless. And then the third phase will be, full-on drug trials, which, think that's 2 to 4 years away. So right now we're kind of in the middle of that first and second phase right now, but it's just beginning, right? I mean, the amount of cannabinoid products prescribed in Brazil is still very, very small, mostly because most companies haven't yet gotten their products registered under that second kind of tier of the regulation.
Got you. Okay. And what's Clever Leaves' approach to Mexico? I know that that was another country of interest that we kind of touched on. So, what does their legislation look like, and how, and what will Clever Leaves need to do to navigate through that?
Well, if you'd asked me at the beginning of 2020, between Brazil and Mexico, which one was going to legalize and which one wasn't, I would have been completely wrong. And I think the entire industry would have been completely wrong. Mexico had a Supreme Court ruling requiring them to legalize. There was a lot of talk about it in Brazil. It kind of snuck up on us, to be honest. And so that's important background, because Mexico is talking yet again about kind of finally creating that legislation, and it seems like it's going to happen. I don't know if it'll happen this year. I think it's going to look like maybe into next year. And so hopefully, we'll be able to do something. Now, we have to wait. We have to see, what are the regulations going to be on CBD? What are they going to be on THC? How are they going to regulate it? Are they going to treat it like the Americans do, which is typically like a nutraceutical product? Or is it going to be treated like the Brazilians or the Germans, and it's a pharmaceutical product? It's looking to be like it's going to be a pharmaceutical product, as opposed to a more vitamin supplement, or like alcohol or something like that. And so we're waiting and see. We have a couple of partners in Mexico that we're working with. We have prepared trial shipments, depending on who those customers are and what authorizations they have from COFEPRIS, which is the Mexican version of the FDA. So we're in wait and see mode, but kind of ready to pounce.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I want to talk to you also about realignment during this current pandemic. I know if anybody's watching the news or reading the paper or on Twitter, we're all kind of looking to see what's going to happen with a possible another lockdown, right? Another shutdown. And I know that other states within the US have already said this. I know the UK is going to go into a full shutdown. I think France also. So how do you see these lockdowns affecting your business operations, say when it comes to shelf life concerns, major bottlenecks, or complete shutdowns of possible international trade, which I don't know if they're talking about right now, but
Yeah, I'm always worried about it. Lose a lot of sleep over it, and maybe that's because it happened to us already, right? In the second quarter, most people aren't aware that most air cargo flights from Colombia were just halted. There was nothing we could do, and it wasn't easy before that, right? Because not every airline is going to cover or carry cannabinoids. You can't transport it, through the United States or any other country maybe that prohibits it. So it's pretty tricky, right? You can't just take it on a United Airlines flight from Bogota to JFK to Sydney. It just doesn't work like that. So we dealt with that before, and it really, really hurt our business. I think it was a big blow to morale. A lot of people come to Clever Leaves because of our mission, right? We're really trying to, we are the first company to ever legally export cannabis from Colombia. And so even just a couple of weeks ago, we were designated a project of national importance and strategic interest for the whole country, right? That's how important what we're doing is in Colombia. And to be told, your exports are going to be zero, very tough. Now we've prepared backups, right? You know, we've looked at shipping by sea. Eventually, these restrictions would come back, but you know, it could be very easy for them to come back into place. So I worry a lot about that, and I'm not sure what I can do about it. The other thing that we found is when countries are dealing with a global pandemic, that's the priority. You know, getting somebody authorized to import cannabis is a second priority, clearly not as important as the first. And so permits have slowed down. Now we were in a weird way a beneficiary of some of that because we had these famous pharmaceutical or GMP inspections back in January of 2020. You know, if we had those scheduled for March, they would have been canceled, right? And we would have been sitting here for another year just waiting for people to travel, because we still have we have employees in Colombia who are in Germany who can't return home.
Wow.
So, you know, if you're thinking about a, you know, inspector from the bee farm, the German FDA trying to come to Colombia, I mean, that's, you know, you might need like an embassy to arrange something like that. It's that difficult.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine the headaches at the global level, especially when it comes to, you know, how everyone's operating differently in different countries and even states and whatnot. And so, like you said, though, there's not much that we can do. There's a lot of unknowns. A lot of this is out of our control. So maybe we shift to more of the positive outlook of like a post, you know, COVID-19 world. We obviously saw here in the U.S. that you know, in a lot of ways, the pandemic was good for the industry. It was a regenerator. You know, it really kind of boosted morale and got us together and kind of fixed some inefficiencies that currently weren't there. And obviously, the companies were also deemed essential. So, what is your outlook for the global cannabis market in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I mean, I can't echo what you said enough. Even though, you know, I have to watch from the sidelines what goes on in the U.S. I remember the day that they closed the liquor stores in Pennsylvania and the dispensaries were still open. I mean, just think about that.
Right.
And then I think it was just this morning, the mayor of Chicago was talking about how they are going to keep 350 city jobs that they were going to have to eliminate solely because of the rise in tax revenue from the cannabis industry. I mean,
It's incredible.
so, you know, kudos to all of our friends that are working in states like Illinois and fighting the fight. I wish we could be there. You know, we have made a pact with our investors that we won't do the U.S. right now, so we'll just have to wait until the laws change. But I mean, that's the message, right?
Right.
This is a thriving industry. People care more about than they do than alcohol. It's a tax generator, and this isn't stopping, right? And the U.S. isn't the only place that this is going to stop. So I think, with the Biden election, you know, we'll put that in asterisks and hope that that is the outcome, because I think we just need certainty around what's happening. I think it means even if Clever Leaves can't import to the United States, which I think is coming, and nobody is thinking about that concept. Nobody is thinking about what it could be like to import cannabis from Colombia to the United States. So set that aside for a second. In just the following days, what did Israel do? Israel announced that they are going to promote a recreational cannabis industry. They would have not done that under the Trump administration. In fact, when Israel talked a couple of years ago about promoting exports, a simple phone call from the Trump administration to Netanyahu over to Israel quashed it, and exports got delayed for almost 2 years. So with the change in the White House, because other countries look to the U.S. to think about drug policy and restricted substances, I think this is going to be a watershed moment, and I think a lot of countries are going to feel a bit more emboldened, a bit more comfortable that, you know, if they're relying, even countries like Colombia, if they rely on the U.S. for anti-narcotics financial aid, that cannabis is okay, right? It's important for the U.S. and it's going to be important for them. So I think this is a pretty exciting moment internationally. You know, everybody's kind of complained it's taken a lot longer to get started than people thought, and I think this is going to help be a catalyst.
Well, do you also, so with the asterisk being on the Biden administration, you know, say he is elected, he comes into office, do you think that change will happen that fast? And the reason I ask is because I know that they've made that part of their promise, right, within their campaign. But One thing I did not see in the transition plan, I know that two priorities, one was COVID and the second was racial inequality, but there was no mention of cannabis reform at all under racial inequality. And I think we all know here in the US that a large majority of minorities, particularly blacks and Hispanics, have been targeted during that reefer madness kind of marijuana prohibition phase, right? So when does that change happen, do you think?
Well, as soon as possible, if I had my way, for many of the reasons that you mentioned and many more. But probably to put on my pragmatic hat, I think it's going to take a couple of years. We'll see. A lot. Everyone's eyes should be on Georgia right now with the runoff elections, and if the Democrats are successful there, I think that could accelerate things a bit. But I would expect maybe within 2 years, the Biden administration will have, pushed through a policy that allows something at the federal level to take place other than just, safe banking or, other protections of state businesses. They will come up with something that will settle the debate at the federal level as to what is allowed and what's not. And depending on that path, I mean, it could be as great as the federal government legalizes cannabis at the federal level. That could be fantastic. Maybe it's just for medical purposes. I think the Biden administration put that on their planks in their platform early on in the process. They could also just reschedule it or deschedule it, move it off the Controlled Substances Act, let the states figure out how to regulate it. I think all of those are more likely. I think no matter what, it's probably going to favor a medical, focus first. Recreational is maybe a couple of years out. And I think, to be honest, that's the perfect window for Clever Leaves, because we produce pharmaceutical products, right? Those shelf lives, all of that quality work that we put into it, that means a Clever Leaves product could be sold at a CVS or a Walgreens.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that makes sense, that approach from medical first, because that's kind of what you see the states do, right? They first become decriminalized state, then they become medical, then they go full adult use. One thing that I want to ask you, Kyle, because I know that you're hyper focused on the international markets, is you mentioned descheduling or even removing the Schedule 1 under the Controlled Substances Act, right? Which is super important. But I recently learned also that the U.S., along with other G7 nations within the UN, have signed the Single Convention on Narcotics, right? I know Canada obviously they signed that, but they obviously are adult use now, so they've kind of pulled away from that treaty. But how much of that falls into play with the U.S. becoming a full adult use country?
Well, I think under the Trump administration, I would say that the Trump administration probably would not be concerned with the 1961 Convention on narcotics, and would withdraw if it was what they wanted. I think the Biden administration is going to try to be a little bit more constructionist with agencies like the United Nations, and probably try to amend or work within the framework of it. I mean, just because you want cannabis, it doesn't mean you want heroin running around and cocaine being imported. That's ridiculous, right? Laws were created by people. People can change them, and so maybe that's the direction this goes in. But maybe it's just a step out of that convention and into something else. We'll see, but that's probably the single most regulatory reason why I think the Biden change is so important, because other countries, Canada doesn't care about that convention when it comes to cannabis. Colombia, Israel, Germany cares a great deal about that. And so if they felt more comfortable that the US was okay with them, changing their interpretation of that convention or creating an entirely new one, I think it would give them a lot more confidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, time will tell, and I'm hoping that at least if there's not any movement at the federal level, at least the states in time will overturn that federal regulation, because we're seeing more states adopt this adult use and recreational framework. So we'll see. Time will tell. But last thing I want to touch on, Kyle, is what are the plans for Clever Leaves in 2021? I mean, do you have plans to go public? I know that there were rumblings and talks about it this year, but due to COVID, probably that slowed some things down. So what are your plans for 2021?
Yeah, we're actually in the process of going public right now. So, we are going public through combination with a SPAC. So the shares of ticker SAMA will hopefully convert to Cleverleaf shares in the fourth quarter. So actually, in about a month from now, Cleverleaves could be a publicly traded company, and we'd be traded on the Nasdaq. So I'd encourage people to look for information, or they can email Cleverleaves to learn more about that process. But we've been working on this for a long time. I think it would be great. You can only raise so much money privately. Cleverleaves has raised about $125 million of financing, which probably makes us one of the last big cannabis companies still remaining private. And it's not that I'm just envious of all of my friends that have the fancier bikes, but I think the ability to raise more capital, to use that currency to compensate employees, to use that currency to potentially acquire businesses internationally. I think those are a lot of the things that we want to accomplish. So that's our currently probably our biggest priority.
Well, you guys are well on your way. I'll tell you, it's very impressive what you're doing internationally, and I feel like the floodgates are going to open for y'all once the U.S. finally becomes legal and reforms some of those legislations that have been enacted years ago. So, Kyle, really, really appreciate having you on today, man. You said the ticker is SAMA, is that right?
That's right.
SAMA. So look out for that come a month or so from now. And you'll have to talk with my friend Rena Sherbel over there at Seeking Alpha. She runs the Cannabis Investing podcast. So
great. Yeah, look forward to that.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Kyle, is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off here?
No, excited to be on the program, and look forward to the next couple of years for Cleverleaves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye.